Welcome to another YouTube video on how to afford a business lawyer with respect to generally launching a new business, starting a new company, pursuing a new commercial enterprise. My name is Christopher Neufeld of Neufeld Legal, and in this particular video we're going to be discussing the importance of correctly budgeting for purposes of affording a business lawyer. Now, the reason I say correctly budgeting is because all too often when people budget to start off their new business, they take template forms or generalistic budgets and they apply it to their own business. And they create constraints and limitations that are not necessarily correct for their business. Or alternatively, they commit to expenditures that really aren't necessitated, but are set out in some pro forma budget for some type of business, which might or might not have succeeded and is not necessarily the case for your own business. And why do I say that? I say that because every business is specific. Even though you might look at a specific type of business, let's say a restaurant business, there are differentiations. You could be in a large metropolitan like New York City or Chicago or Los Angeles, and you have a very different dynamic than if you're in a rural community in Montana or Saskatchewan, Canada, or elsewhere. So what happens is that people look too quickly to budgets and say, they might find them, or even the advisors, if they're not proficient in the area that they're talking about or aren't properly assessing your business, they will look at a budget and say, here's a budget, assign this much for this kind of work, for marketing, this much for insurance, this much for leasing, this much for accountants, this much for lawyers. And they don't even go into the specifics of what is needed. And this is very problematic because although you get the mistaken and false belief that you're putting your money in the correct places, that isn't necessarily the truth. You could very well be putting your money in the wrong places, overspending or spending too little. And when it comes to overspending, you see lots of that on stuff that is not really necessary or is not focused or could be done at a better rate. On the flip side, you have underspending. And what you find oftentimes is in certain specific situations, people underspend with respect to lawyers. And they're underspending also with respect to using the right lawyers for the right processes that they're engaged in. So what they need to do is step back a bit and look at what you're dealing with. Is your budget really being designed specifically to what your needs are? Or is it just being drawn from a template and has it been properly worked in? So once you do that, you can talk to, if you're working with an advisor, ask them if they've really assessed what you need from a whole slew of areas, not just legal, but all the areas, and where they developed this particular budget, and if they took into account aspects such as the specific type of business, the specific type of demographics of the customer base you're dealing with, specific suppliers you're dealing with, and your location. Location is a very important thing to consider also when looking at budgets. Both your location as a where geographically you are, but also where you are relative to the population and other businesses. So once you've done that, you can start to understand and see where you can cut back and where you have to focus your budgeting. Then next, ask them, have they looked, or you should ask yourself, have they or you looked at the specific dynamics of your legal needs? And more than likely, unless you're dealing with a lawyer and asking these questions to a lawyer, they can't tell you heads or tails as to whether or not they've addressed what you need from a legal perspective, because they're not a lawyer and they don't know, they probably haven't asked you the right questions with respect to what a lawyer who's a skilled and experienced business lawyer would be asking you to determine what needs to be tackled now and what can be put off for 6 months or put off for a year or 2 years. That is very important to yourself. But most of the time, if you're drawing stuff off the internet, getting templates from the bank or other financial institutions, or having a non-lawyer advisor or consultant provide you with budgeting information, or simply getting a book from the library or the bookstore to develop your budget, you aren't necessarily going to have that depth of knowledge that you need for purposes of determining what you need from a business lawyer and how much it will cost when you need to do it, and many other aspects that the lawyer can answer for you in a very short and immediate time. So from that perspective, you move on and you say, okay, let me talk to the lawyer. Let me make a call to a lawyer and find out, given the specifics of my business, what should I really be considering from a budgeting standpoint? And most lawyers, like myself, will give you some sense of idea as to what you should be looking at. Naturally, it's only going to be based on specifics, and it's until you have actually retained the lawyer and the lawyer spent time and gone through the file a bit. It doesn't take a lot of time to give you a general idea as to what you should be focusing on immediately and why the concern is with any particular element. Then you can properly consider this in your budget. So instead of, and I love it about franchise agreements, and I'm being a bit sarcastic on this sense, is that they suggest oftentimes very low budgets with respect to lawyers. And oftentimes that's because they want to, I'm not sure, generally present where your emphasis, where their preference on emphasis should be. And they say, here's what you should be spending on lawyers. Now, what they might really be saying, and you got to consider this, is this is the amount of money you should be spending on lawyers in relation to your franchise agreement and disclosure document of franchise preparation, as opposed to what you really need to do with respect to setting up your business, setting up the structure internally and externally, and dealing properly with a whole host of parties, whether it's banks for financing, landlords for leasing, customers, marketing, just a range of challenges that you can find. And then the internal ones of dealing with your fellow shareholders, especially when, like, for example, in franchises, oftentimes the franchises want you to have the general manager have a slight equity stake in the business. Dangerous, dangerous, dangerous if it's not done well. But they're giving you these suggestions of $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 to do all this stuff. It doesn't work that way. And especially when your budget could very well be in the $400,000 to $500,000 range. So back to your budget. Once you've figured out where you are budgeting for legal elements and considering what is appropriate, you can then put it in perspective and say, this is actually what I do need relative to other elements. And only by doing that and understanding which elements are really driving your business, and this is the other thing, you got to look at and ask the lawyer, why is this relevant? Why is this important to me to budget and spend the money on now? And you almost then can comparatively assess the values and both advantages and disadvantages of paying for something or spending a certain number on a particular item. And this is a critical thing. This is why you have an opportunity when you're budgeting and before you're spending the money to make an assessment. You look at everything that you've budgeted and you ask yourself, is this really going to bring the value to myself, both immediately and long term? because especially when it comes to legal stuff, there's a lot of elements that if you are cheap out on early on, you're never going to recover from. You're going to be in a position where you're locked in. Whether this is locked in with business partners and fellow shareholders, locked in with respect to landlords, locked in with respect to banks, franchise systems, and the like, that you commit yourself and then you could be tied in for 5, 10, forever, effectively, with these other individuals and companies. And you have to assess, is it worth the risk? Is it worth the cost or the savings that I'm going to incur? Similarly, you look at other elements and you say, do I really have to spend all that money right now on this high cost element? Maybe it is something that you reduce slightly and you reallocate the monies, because that's important too. You got to consider about reallocation. If something is going to have a permanent and lasting effect on your business, and something else is you can easily pick it up and it's not going to show that much difference, and there's alternatives for at least a few months where you can reduce the costing, why don't you look at doing that? And that is the importance of budgeting. You're doing budgeting not only for the immediate level, but for the foreseeable future. And if you're just budgeting on the basis of, I want to fill in a sheet of paper, show it, and say I've done it, then you're really not doing a justice to yourself and to your business aspirations, and also your family's money. Because now you're just burning money, you're allocating it on a direction that isn't necessarily prudent for yourself and for your family and for the corporate venture that you're about to embark upon. So this leads us back to how to effectively budget and pay for a business lawyer. You got to create an overall budget that is specific to your business, that you properly work to modify and address those needs that you really do need. And understand that a budget is more than a sheet of paper where you simply allocate numbers and then you operate on the basis of those numbers. That is a very, very bad decision with respect to how you operate your business, and it's going to cause you a lot of headache and problems going forward. I trust that you have found this YouTube video informative. Please like the video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, provide us with your comments. With respect to paid legal services which we offer, we'd be more than happy to offer that to yourself, given that by watching this video, it shows that you have a genuine interest in the success of your own business. And as such, you have a genuine interest in budgeting correctly for that business. So if you're looking for someone to assist you with respect to understanding how the legal component can come into that budget and why it makes sense to pay for appropriate, experienced legal services from a knowledgeable business lawyer, we're here to assist you on that, with our contact information being contained within this YouTube video and the information that's set out below. Thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing you again in future YouTube videos.